Magical realism is another subgenre of the fantasy family of children's literature. So we can think of magical realism as a hybrid of sorts between realistic fiction and fantasy. And usually with magical realism, we just have one small touch of magic or one small touch of fantasy, even less so than books that we would categorize as low fantasy. So these stories are mostly realistic, but just have a little smidgen of magic. One good example of magical realism that is recent is Crenshaw by Katherine Applegate. If you're not familiar with Crenshaw, it's a book about a young boy named Jackson, and his family is facing a lot of hard times financially. And when Jackson and his family are going through these stressful, hard times, Jackson's imaginary friend Crenshaw, who's this giant black and white cat, comes to comfort him and give Jackson some friendship. And Jackson is well aware that Crenshaw is an imaginary friend, so like we can look at this part of the story as being realistic, right? Because kids have imaginary friends and talk to imaginary friends, right? But at the end of the book, I'm not going to give it away, but something happens at the end of the book that leads us to think that maybe Crenshaw isn't quite so imaginary as we thought. So I would categorize the book as magical realism. So other books that might be considered magical realism, for example, Green Glass House, it seems very much realistic as you're reading this story. It's a mystery story, very engaging book, one that I really enjoyed. But at the end of the book, there's a twist that makes us realize, oh, this isn't so realistic after all. So that's another example of magical realism. So think a realistic fiction book with just a little touch of magic in it, and that's magical realism.